Welcome to the Capitol News. I am your host, Alex Koritis. Today is November 13th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. The title of today's podcast is Impeachment Hearings Day I. This is the first round of public hearings in this impeachment inquiry, which is expected to last off at least for the next couple to few weeks. Of course, there could be some bombshells that come out after the fact. There are still some things taking place through the court system as to whether or not people are actually going to come forward to testify. We'll get to that in a little bit. We also had the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, giving testimony as well today. So this was a busy day up there on Capitol Hill. We're going to devote most of our attention here today on the impeachment hearings. This was, again, the first round, day one. We had two individuals. We had George Kent and Bill Taylor testifying at the same time. On Friday will be the second round of public hearings. That will be with Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. Now, this was not a huge political circus, thank goodness. There's no question that there were some circus acts that took place today on both sides of the aisle. This is to be anticipated. This is Washington, D.C. This is politics. It ain't going away, so we just got to deal with it. But this was not horrendous. I don't think that this was an embarrassment to the country. I mean, we've seen those types of hearings before where it's sort of, oh, I can't believe, these people are our representatives. I mean, you're still going to have some of that, but this is by far not the worst that we have seen, at least in my opinion. Again, most of the questions were asked by the majority counsel and the minority counsel, Democratic Party and Republican Party, respectively. And, of course, there were questions by representatives as well. No major bombshells. Nothing that was really earth-shaking or shattering. However, Bill Taylor, Ambassador Taylor, he did sort of amend his opening statement and mention something that I think they're going to have to continue to investigate and is not boding too well for Donald Trump if what Bill Taylor said turns out to be true. What did Mr. Taylor say? He says, well, I've learned since I gave my behind-closed-door deposition, I've learned some other information. One of my staff members over in Ukraine was in Ukraine on July 26th. This date is important because July 25th is the date of the phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine, the whole thing that started everything, right? So the date's important. This is the day after. Phone call July 25th. What Bill Taylor is explaining is the day after in Ukraine on July 26th between his staff member, Ambassador Gordon Sondland. Again, this is the political appointee. This is the gentleman who contributed about $1 million to Donald Trump's inaugural committee, and he was rewarded, if you will, with an ambassadorship. Again, this is nothing to raise your eyebrows about. This is how the game's played. This is how it's been done. So he's back in the forefront because, recall, he amended his deposition, his transcript that was behind closed doors. Why? Well, we're speculating because he caught wind of the testimony of other members because those transcripts were released. And he says, oh, you know what? We do have this window of opportunity, him and his counsel, to review the transcript to make sure everything is accurate. And he said, you know what, given the other testimony, it's sort of knocking some things loose in my memory, and I'm going to have to amend this. And basically before, Ambassador Sondland was saying there really was no quid pro quo, and then he changed his tune. Yes, given everything else, there was a quid pro quo. There was some uneasiness to this entire episode. So according to Taylor, one of his staff members over in Ukraine, in Kiev, with Ambassador Sondland on July 26th, Sondland allegedly makes a phone call to the president. They're in public, by the way. They're in a restaurant. He makes a phone call to the president to sort of brief him on what's going on with the Ukraine situation. Evidently or allegedly, this staff member claims that he can overhear Donald Trump on the other end, which is common practice. I mean, everybody has a cell phone. Sometimes the other person's talking very loud or the individual has their volume up loud, so it's easier to hear the other person. This case allegedly being Donald Trump. On the phone call, what's overheard is that Donald Trump is asking about how are the investigations going when it comes to the Bidens. Again, this is one day after the phone call with Zelensky. Not what's going on with overall corruption in Ukraine, not what's going on with making headway so we can release this aid that they desperately need. How are the investigations going with the Bidens? And the phone call ends. This staff member asks Ambassador Sondland, what was that about? How did that go? Oh, Donald Trump, the president, is more concerned with what Rudy Giuliani told him and what's going on with the Bidens as opposed to caring for Ukraine. Now, that's not good. That's not good, because now this is really making a direct link that President Trump is really quite interested in investigating the Bidens above and beyond general corruption and providing this aid that Ukraine is in desperate need for. That's not good. Now, also today, President Erdogan of Turkey was in the White House. This was a scheduled meeting. Not much came of it, but nevertheless, there were the optics. Maybe you can keep the doors open for negotiation and open talks. That's a good thing. But Donald Trump was asked in, the Q&A session, the presser that they give. He was asked about this. What do you know about this? His response, I don't recall. It's the first time I'm hearing this. I've never heard this. I don't recall even a little bit. So Donald Trump is going to deny this. He remembers very clearly the phone call on July 25th. We know he remembers this very clearly because he's tweeting and talking about it all the time. Read the transcript. It's a perfect phone call. So that's vivid. But the very next day, July 26th, a conversation with Ambassador Sondland, a political appointee who gave him $1 million for his inaugural committee. Donald Trump also claims, I don't really know this gentleman that well. He doesn't remember that phone call. Convenient political amnesia, perhaps. Seems to be going around in Washington, D.C. It's quite contagious, I hear. So that's not boding well. Now you have to ask the question, well, okay, who is this alleged staffer? Well, I'm glad you asked. Doesn't that individual need to be investigated? Doesn't this gentleman, it is a man, doesn't he have to come forward and testify? He's going to testify. He is scheduled to testify behind closed doors this Friday. So I imagine that this individual is going to testify. He will be under oath. And I imagine, given the recent history of how things have been progressing, that transcript will too be released, and I imagine this individual will also testify in public at some point down the road. Okay, so that's not boding too well for President Trump if this happens to be true. It's also not going to bode very well for Ambassador Sondland because he already changed his tune. He already amended his transcript. Now, this piece of information was left out. Now, maybe perhaps he wasn't asked the question. I didn't go through everybody's transcript. I told you it's just like 4,000 pages. I'm just not doing it right now. Okay, my apologies. Maybe he just wasn't asked the question if he had a phone call, or maybe he danced around it. Now he's going to be specifically asked about this. Was there a phone call the next day? Did you state this? Yes or no? So it's going to be very straightforward. Somebody is going to be caught in a lie if there are denials. So it's going to be interesting to see who that is. If it's this staffer, then it's going to lose credibility for what Donald Trump allegedly said, and that's not going to bode well for the Democrats' argument. If Sondland happens to be lying, that's not going to bode well very well for him either. And I think Sondland is probably regretting giving Donald Trump his inaugural committee $1 million. That's my guess. Because I think he was trying to perhaps maybe defend or protect the president at first, but then he said, you know what, I'm not falling on the sword for this guy, perhaps. I don't want to get caught up in this more than I already am. Here's the transcript. We got to amend it. Yeah, there was a quid pro quo. Yes, there's a problem. And, of course, Donald Trump made comment to that in his answer this afternoon, saying, I wish Sondland stuck with his first answer. So he doesn't know the gentleman very well, doesn't recall the July 26th phone call, but he remembers what Sondland said the first time in the first testimony. So, again, political, convenient amnesia. Par for the course. I'm not picking on Donald Trump. They all do it. Not that they should, but that's the game. All right, what else do we have? We have the Republicans. Their argument now, at least for the time being, is they are claiming that these individuals, George Kent and Bill Taylor, these individuals are second and third-hand witnesses, so to speak. They don't have first-hand knowledge. They never met nor spoke with Donald Trump specifically ever, and especially not in regards to this issue. So everything from them is basically hearsay. Now, that doesn't mean that what these individuals are testifying to is not important. It provides background. It provides a little bit of color as to laying the groundwork as to what's going on. The Republicans make a good argument that they are second and third-hand witnesses. They never heard Donald Trump make this claim that there is a quid pro quo, that Ukraine has to comply with my wish or my desire that they investigate the Bidens in 2016 and Burisma and all that stuff. Again, Burisma being the Ukrainian energy company where Vice President Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden, was a board member. Okay? So nobody heard him say that, at least not these two individuals. So the Republicans are saying, well, what's their credibility in this? It's all hearsay. They're not the first-hand witnesses. Okay, well, then you're opening the door to demand, logically, that first-hand witnesses step forward, right? If you're going to complain that we're dealing with second- and third-hand people, then don't you need to demand that first-hand witnesses comply with subpoenas and come forward and testify? Those first-hand witnesses, well, we might get one with Ambassador Sondland. Well, he's already testified. Now he's got to come up. He's in this hot water now, too. What about former National Security Advisor John Bolton? Maybe he should step forward. What about Secretary of State Mike Pompeo? What about Vice President Mike Pence? What about Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney? What about the President himself? Because everybody right now who is a first-hand witness has not testified. They have not come forward. Maybe with the exception of Sondland, maybe with the exception of Fiona Hill, who's coming forward, and maybe with the exception of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. Maybe. There's a little bit of wishy-washy stuff on all of this stuff. There's nothing really dead to rights here, at least not right now. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be. I think it's evident enough that Donald Trump, I think he crossed the line in asking President Zelensky to do us a favor and to look into the Bidens. Never should have brought that up, in my opinion, for a number of reasons. One, it's wrong. Two, I think it can turn into an abuse of power, especially if it's found out through subsequent testimony here through these hearings and investigations, if this is something that he was, rather obsessed with and that was his main priority. So it becomes politics over policy. That's basically an abuse of power at this juncture, because you have to understand, for 2 years, Bob Mueller and his team were investigating 2016 election interference. And sort of front and center, but a little bit more side cart to it, was how was Donald Trump's campaign and possibly his administration involved with the Russians and 2016 election interference. So at the crux of it, we don't want foreign interference in our elections. Well, that's logical. And then you have Donald Trump himself on the phone call, read the transcript like he tells you, like we did here a month or so ago whenever it was released. Read it. What's it say? Hey, Mr. President, congratulations. A lot of stuff going on in Ukraine. A lot of stuff going on here. Can you do us a favor? Can you look into 2016 election interference? Can you look into this company? I don't think the company was named, if I remember correctly. He didn't name Burisma, but talking about the company, we know who it is because he talks about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. How can you do that? How can you just go through a 2-year investigation, the entire time calling it a hoax, a witch hunt, a fraud, and then pick up the phone pretty much the next day and say, hey, Mr. President of a foreign country, can you look into the guy who's running against me in my presidential campaign? You see what you can find out about that? You got to be kidding me. You have to be kidding. This is why I'm telling you, you have to also put in the back of your mind, will this individual, in this case it's Donald Trump, will he do the same thing again? Yes, he will. If he skates, he will do this again. If he has to pick up the phone and ask a foreign government for help to investigate a political opponent, for whatever reason, he'll do it again. Because he just went through 2 years of Bob Mueller, witch hunt, hoax, disgrace, unbelievable, did nothing wrong. Then he picks up the phone, President Zelensky, look into the Bidens. Can't make this stuff up. Furthermore, the Republicans and Donald Trump like to talk about how the Obama administration, how the Clinton campaign used foreign sources to investigate Donald Trump. And then you have all the chants, lock her up, lock them up, blah, 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 blah. We went through that earlier this year. It does look like the Clinton campaign worked with Christopher Steele of the Steele dossier, who worked with Russian assets. There's problems all over the place here, folks, but it's so unbelievable that Donald Trump would even do this, that he could even think about asking such a question. When for the past 3 years, he's been complaining about this exact same thing, saying it's not right for Obama to do it, it's not right for Susan Rice, for James Clapper, for John Brennan, for Hillary Clinton, all of them. It's not right for them to do it. They got to be locked up. Remember, he said that to Hillary Clinton in their one debate. Of course you wouldn't, because you'd be in jail talking about this stuff. All of it. And now he picks up the phone and asks this question. If one's guilty, they're all guilty. I don't have a dog in this hunt. You know who my dog in this hunt is? The U.S. Constitution. It's the truth. It's justice. Not Donald Trump, not Hillary Clinton, not Obama. Not a Republican, not a Democrat. The truth and justice. If they're all guilty, lock them all up. You got to get over this. You can't do this. You can't just say this is my guy so he can get away with anything. It's not how it works here. That's why we have this divisiveness. And you got to rise above it. If you're in this muck, if you're justifying things for your guy, you are not a part of the solution. You are a part of the problem. Now, the other interesting thing with these Republicans making this argument that these are second and third-hand witnesses thus far, again, George Kent and Bill Taylor, that argument's going to fall on its face pretty soon because Sondland is a first-hand witness to all of this. In fact, I think because he is a political appointee, that's why Donald Trump has gone through him. Because I don't think Donald Trump trusts a lot of people in the State Department. Well, Ambassador Sondland is not a career foreign service individual. He's not. He's a businessman. He's a political appointee because he donated $1 million to Donald Trump's inaugural committee. So he maybe trusts this individual, although he claims that he rarely knows this gentleman. Yet he has him running point, allegedly, him and Giuliani, with this whole Ukraine mess. So something's not jiving here. Your wheels turning, starting to make sense? Just not too good. So again, Republicans argue second, third hand. What happens when the first-hand witnesses start to come in? Sondland, perhaps Fiona Hill. Again, she was a senior advisor inside the White House for Russian policy. What about Lieutenant Colonel Vindman? He's still working in the White House. He's still there. He was on the call. Okay? So these are some people who have some firsthand knowledge of the phone call or have spoken specifically with the president. Maybe not necessarily on this matter, although Sondland seems to have. But they might know, maybe there's a fact pattern. Maybe Donald Trump, they know how he's thinking on some of these issues. And don't forget, Fiona Hill's the one who was told by John Bolton, get away from Giuliani in this drug deal. Stay away from it. Go to the requisite counsel within the White House or the National Security Council. Talk to the right legal personnel that you have some issues. What's he telling them to do? He's telling them to create a paper trail. I told you, I don't like John Bolton, but you don't rise to that type of power to have multiple ears of multiple presidents without being an operator. He knows how to operate. And he knows how to cover his rear end. And that's exactly what they were doing. So it'll be interesting to see if John Bolton comes forward, because he's probably somewhat of a disgruntled employee. Okay? So that's not going to bode too well either, I would have to imagine. Now the Republicans are continuing to call for the whistleblower to come forward and testify. I personally would like to see the whistleblower come forward as well. Just to sort of put an end to everything. Here's the individual. Here's what you know. Here's what you said. Even though we have the transcripts and the complaint and everything from the whistleblower and the memo from the Inspector General of the intelligence community. So even though we have that, and I still believe that the whistleblower does not have to come forward. And we've gone through that. I've given the analogy of an anonymous tip to a police hotline. They call, police go out and investigate. Yeah, there's some truth and validity to this. Then you start a bigger investigation, and you got a whole bunch of people caught up in the investigation. So you don't need the anonymous tipster to make it to court to testify that they were the first start. You don't have to, because you've proven through other evidence that there was a crime and you caught them in the act, or however you may have caught them. Okay? So they don't have to come forward, the whistleblower, but it would be a good thing. Although, how happy would the Republicans actually be? Because the whole way through this process, the Republicans have been complaining. First, it was behind closed doors. Well, you can't have that. Well, you better start releasing those transcripts. Well, they released the transcripts. Well, that's not good enough. You better have public hearings. Well, now there's public hearings. And now they're complaining, well, at least these first two witnesses up, they're second and third hand sources, so they're not that good. Okay. I don't know. I thought they provided some color to everything. I thought they were good witnesses. I thought they lended credibility to themselves. I mean, they are, career diplomats and people who have served this country, I would think, honorably and with integrity. The one individual, Ambassador Taylor, was in the top, what did he say? He was 5th out of 800 in his West Point class. So, I mean, a very smart and outstanding figure, somebody who served in Vietnam and actually came out of retirement, who was called back to this position by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Okay? So you can't really go to the whole conspiracy that this is a deep stater, this is a never-Trumper, and in fact, that question came up. Are you individuals, are both of you gentlemen never-Trumpers? No, was their response. No, under oath. And the one of them went a little bit further and said, I have served under Republicans and Democrats. I serve duly elected presidents, and we carry out their foreign policy. So these are never-Trumpers. And I think that argument from Donald Trump, you're either with me or you're a never-Trumper, is not a good one. It's not a good one. And I also don't think him coming out and saying that, read the transcript, it was a perfect phone call, is carrying a lot of water for him either. It might with his base, but his base is going to follow him regardless. I mean, he could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and they wouldn't care. I believe that. A good portion of them anyway. Because, and the reason I say that that's not a good argument for the general public outside of his base is because he doesn't even have Republicans coming to his side and saying, yeah, the phone call was perfect, there's nothing wrong. They can't even come out and say that. And thus far, everything that they've come out and said, second, third-hand witness, that's going to fall by the wayside when these first-hand witnesses do. And a whole host of other things. It's behind closed doors, then the transcripts are released, has to be public, now it's public. The Republicans are putting themselves in a corner, and this is really Donald Trump's doing because he is sticking to it being a perfect phone call. Not coming out and ever admitting, I shouldn't have done this, and I'm not going to do it again. Because I think the American people would probably say, well, you know what, this probably was inappropriate. You probably shouldn't have asked this question, but you did. At least you're admitting that it was wrong and that you're not going to do it again. I think most Americans would probably find some forgiveness and say, let's move on. It's not impeachable, or if it's impeachable, you don't kick them out for it. And we have an election coming up, and we can get past this for another 12 months. But he's not doing that. He's digging in. It's a perfect phone call. Because everything he does is perfect. Of course, it's not. But that's his argument, and I think it's starting to cripple him and the Republicans who are attempting to defend him. It just doesn't bode well for him. Now, another question that was asked by a Republican was, did Ukraine receive aid in the year 2017? Answer, yes. Did Ukraine receive aid in 2018? Answer, yes. Did Ukraine receive aid in 2019? Answer, yes. However, you have somewhat of a shady timeline in 2019 because the aid was held up. Okay? And you have Republicans who are making the argument that it was held up because Donald Trump wanted to do some vetting of President Zelensky to see how, is this guy a straight shooter or is he corrupt? And are we going to release the money? Well, Congress had already appropriated the money. That's how it works in this country. Congress has control of the purse strings, and it's the job of the president as the representative of the executive branch to enforce the law. Well, the law was to appropriate this money and these weapons to Ukraine. So he has to do it, which becomes, a little bit of the problem in this whole impeachment inquiry, too, which could be something that the Democrats perhaps charge him with, or maybe bribery or some act thereof. So that question's asked. 2017, yes. 2018, yes. 2019, yes. Okay. Now the Republicans are making the argument again. Zelensky has been vetted. Weapons released. Democrats, and, maybe not so much, because there is other testimony that members within the State Department were saying for quite a while that Zelensky is a good guy. We can work with him. There doesn't need to be this additional vetting going on here. You don't have to hold this up. And in fact, they need this aid pronto. It's just going to throw a whole wrench into everything. Russia is going to try to will exploit this weakness if we don't give them this aid. So it's not going to look good. So Zelensky is good. Give them the aid. They deserve it, and we'll move forward. But of course, in the same time frame, while this aid was on hold, is when the whistleblower complaint came out. So did Donald Trump and the White House release the aid to Ukraine because Zelensky was finally vetted to his liking? Or because did they sense the political ramifications of a whistleblower complaint coming down the pike in regards to withholding aid to Ukraine and asking a question about Ukraine investigating Joe Biden, a political opponent? So why the importance of the question to ask about 2017 and 2018? Well, the Republican was trying to get the point across that this was never a problem before. Donald Trump has given aid to Ukraine. So it's not a vendetta against Ukraine. He's given them the aid before. He didn't buck them then. No, that's right, he didn't. But guess what? In 2017, Joe Biden wasn't running for president. Guess what? In 2018, Joe Biden wasn't running for president. But guess what? In 2019, Joe Biden is running for president, and he is the front runner against Donald Trump. And is it just a coincidence that in that same year, 2019, when Joe Biden is a political opponent, that Donald Trump happens to say, hold your horses. Yeah, we got this aid, but guess what? We got some problems going on here. You got some problems going on over there. Can you do us a favor? Doesn't look good. Doesn't look good. And if those of you who have been with me know that I have tried to defend the president, trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. From the get-go, I said that transcript alone that was released by Donald Trump, which is, of course, a quasi-transcript because it's not verbatim, I said, look, I don't think that in and of itself rises to an impeachable offense. And logically, most definitely, it would not rise to an offense that would warrant kicking him out of office. But I said it does justify an investigation. And everything that we are starting to find out, at least in my opinion, does not bode well for Donald Trump. Now, again, like I just said previously, he could calm everything down by taking some responsibility here. But he's digging in. He's doubling, tripling down. It's a perfect phone call. There was nothing wrong. No, sir, there was something wrong. You asked a foreign government to investigate your political rival. Burisma was around in 2017 and 2018. Where were your phone calls then? And again, if those exist, those should be released. But Donald Trump has never made such a claim. Giuliani has never made such a claim. Pompeo has never made such a claim. Mike Pence has never made such a claim. Nobody has made such a claim. This all happened this year. That's the problem. It's one of them. Another defense that the Republicans are putting out there is even if Donald Trump did this, Ukraine didn't know about it, which is not necessarily true, and I think we're going to find that out. And secondly, Zelensky never came out and said we're going to investigate the Bidens, or we're not going to investigate 2016. Or he never came out and said that we're going to investigate Burisma or CrowdStrike and all this other stuff. Never did it. So what's the problem? Well, you can't plot a crime. I mean, you can't call up a hitman, pay the guy, say, here's what I want you to do for me, and then the hitman doesn't do it, and then by some circumstance, you're found out that you hired a hitman. You got a problem. So I don't think this argument is really going to hold water. It does a good job for distraction purposes. But I think at the end of the day, net, it's really not going to hold that much water. It might not get Donald Trump the electric chair, but it's not boding too well for his case either. Well, they didn't do what I wanted. Well, you stopped them before they did. Maybe they were going to come out because there were reports that President Zelensky was going to come out and give an interview to CNN. Now, what was going to be the topic? We don't know if he would have made a public comment. But we do know through testimony, through these depositions, that Donald Trump, or at least Rudy Giuliani, wanted Zelensky to come out publicly And it would not be acceptable unless he mentioned 2016, CrowdStrike, and Burisma, and perhaps the Bidens. The Bidens would be, you know, the cherry and the icing on top if he actually came out and said the Bidens. But Burisma would have been enough, because that would have been enough linkage to say there's some funny business going on between the Bidens and Ukraine, and we can't have that, politically speaking. And of course, that same question came up to these gentlemen in their testimony, and they said it was a concern from the standpoint of a conflict of interest, but to our knowledge, there was never any corruption. There was never any funny business that involved Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and Burisma. That's what they're saying on the record under oath. And Donald Trump continues to push this somewhat conspiracy theory, if you will. So we'll see what happens. We also have Rudy Giuliani tweeting out, talking about, you need firsthand witnesses. Well, Rudy, then saddle up, partner. You've been claiming that you're going to be the hero when this is all said and done, so saddle up. Go testify. Come on. Get down there. Take Pompeo and Pence with you. Get Bolton with you, too. Get Mulvaney. And if you can convince Donald Trump, take him with you, and all raise your right hand and take an oath. Get the Bidens down there with you. Get Obama. Get them all. Put it aside, this politics. Put it aside. Let's get the truth. Let's get some justice. You want to drain the swamp? It's all of them. Believe me when I tell you. And Donald Trump is no exception. Negative. I'm not even going to go down that path right now, negative interest rates, but it just gets my blood going. So Giuliani can't even stay off Twitter, and he makes a stupid comment. Unless, of course, he is the hero and he wants to come testify. Then come do it. Because all they've said is we got the documents. We got everything. Donald Trump, for 3 years, I got the documents. All I have to do is declassify. Everybody's dead to rights. If you have the documents internally, then why are you asking a foreign leader to investigate Joe Biden? Makes no sense. Makes no sense. So that's that with the impeachment hearing, and this is only day one. And these are second and third-hand witnesses, okay? But they're concerned. They're concerned because they are involved very highly at the highest levels of foreign policy with Ukraine. They understand the situation. They understand how Russia and Vladimir Putin would easily exploit this weakness if Ukraine is not given the security and defense aid that they need. And, you can connect the dots with a lot of things that Donald Trump has been doing that has benefited Russia in certain ways, particularly with Syria and the ceasefire and everything that's going on over there. Not really saying that Donald Trump is working for Putin. I'm not going that far. I'm not down that rabbit hole, not even close. But I'm just telling you, there are some things that, if he did not give the aid to Ukraine, it would have been a good thing for Vladimir Putin. And that wouldn't have been a good thing for Ukraine, and it probably wouldn't have been a good thing for the United States of America, net as well. So I think the most interesting testimony is probably going to be Ambassador Sondland's, and we'll see what happens with Maria Ivanovich, because she was the ambassador who was mentioned in the phone call, not by name, but she's the ambassador who's going to go through some things, and of course that meant she was going to be fired, and she was. So that'll be interesting to see her interpretation and how she presents herself before the committee. Lastly, with Jay Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, he gave some testimony. Didn't really catch it. We really didn't miss much, I'm sure. The economy is in a good place, of course. That's the BS we've been given. And then he has the audacity to say that the United States debt is unsustainable. Where do they get the audacity to say this stuff? I mean, do you understand that the Federal Reserve is facilitating and allowing this massive debt expansion from the federal government? So much for draining the swamp. You understand this? He could literally, with the lot of them at the Federal Reserve, not embark on money printing, not embark on printing $60 billion a month, buying U.S. debt. He could increase interest rates. And what would that do? That would send a message to Washington, D.C. Hey, don't spend so much because we're going to have to pay more in interest. And the further we go down, kicking this can further and further down the road, interest payments alone are going to take up a significant portion of our overall budget. Do the math. It's arithmetic. It's nothing fancy. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. And of course, Thunder Thumbs, Donald Trump thinks it's a great idea to do negative interest rates. So all of the savings that you have, why would you buy a bond? You're going to have to pay Uncle Sam. Don't you pay him enough with taxes? Don't you pay enough with the cost of inflation, with the Federal Reserve printing all this money? Yeah, why not? Steal my savings too. Jobs versus savings. Talking about it in Europe with those socialists. We'll never be a socialist nation here. Not as long as I'm president. But let's follow those socialists over there in Europe and let's bring negative interest rates home here. That's impeachable. That's a crime. Taxes ain't enough. Inflation, currency devaluation isn't enough. I got to take your savings too. Can't make this stuff up. But everything's okay, folks. Nothing to see here. Lastly, before I sign off, in regards to the U.S. budget gap, it rises in October. The U.S. budget deficit widened to $134 billion in the month of October, up from $100.5 billion a year earlier. So an increase of 34%. Receipts fell 2.8% to $245 billion. Meanwhile, outlays or expenditures were up 7.6% to $380 billion. So receipts are down 2.8, expenditures are up 7.6. Ain't that fantastic? Didn't Donald Trump tell us yesterday at the Economic Club of New York that the United States is bringing in more money than ever before? Then how do we have a bigger budget gap? Surprising, isn't it? Or maybe not so. Around the world, Australia jobless rate inches higher to 5.3%. Chinese fixed asset investment growth hits a record low. Chinese industrial output rises less than estimated. Chinese retail sales growth slows to a 6-month low. Chinese shares right now are flat on weak industrial output. Wow, surprise, surprise, surprise. But if we can sell soybeans, everything will be okay. In the land of Oz, you live. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, stay with the Capital News. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out, leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.